Hello, everybody. My name is Mette Petersen. I'm President and Managing Director of Kombucha Incorporated. I just wanted to take just a brief moment to introduce myself and our company. Many of you are probably familiar with our company as such. We are the wholly owned subsidiary of Kombucha GmbH, headquartered in Cologne, Germany. And we've been based in Chicago for the past 18 years. We handle all of the companies and industries in the US, Canada, and Mexico, with obviously the majority of them being American companies. As a company, we work in many different industries, but food and food technology are really our key sectors. And with that, we work with hundreds, we at least traditionally work with hundreds of manufacturers and suppliers every year who utilize our trade shows towards expanding their international business worldwide. And of course, with that comes the question of funding opportunities to actually accomplishing that. We have therefore worked very closely with the state regional trade groups, the SRTGs, on actually helping companies take advantage of our trade shows. And on this slide, we're listing the key food shows that we organize. You are probably familiar with Anuga. We work with all the SRTGs in conjunction with Anuga in Cologne. But some of our other shows are the Typex Anuga show in Bangkok. We do a food show called Alimentec in Bogota, Colombia. We organize AnuFood India in Mumbai, AnuFood shows in Brazil and China, gourmet show in Japan, and then some specialized sweets and snack shows. So talking about the state regional trade groups, we are really thrilled to have panelists join us today from the SRTGs. And with that, I wanted to just briefly introduce, first of all, Molly Burns is a branded program manager with the Food Export Association. Molly handles all of the funding applications, and today she represents the Food Export Associations both in the Midwest and in Northeast. The Midwest office is located in Chicago and Northeast in Philadelphia. We also have Andy Anderson join us today. Andy is Executive Director of WUSATA, Western United States Agricultural Trade Association. Andy has been on board for many years. I believe we've worked with Andy certainly ever since I've been on board, which is close to 17 years. And we work with his team all along. Andy is located in Vancouver, Washington. And then we have Danielle Coco join us as well. Danielle heads up the Marketing and Communications Department with SUSTA, Southern United States Trade Association. And last but not least, Kim Hamilton is with us today. Kim organizes all the international activities for the Illinois Department of Agriculture. And she's also, at the same time, the state liaison for Food Export Midwest. So we're really thrilled to have all of you join us. Thank you so much for taking time to join us. So with that, I suggest, I know everybody is conscious of time. So with that, I'll hand the word back to Veronica so we can run through some of the export funding opportunities available.
We're talking today primarily about funding for private sector companies, not so much for associations and organizations. There is funding for them available also. So Darren, if you can slide to the next slide, please. So I might want to go over some of the general eligibility requirements that really affects most of, or really is valuable. It is for most of these programs. There are differences, so you want to be really sure to check with your branded managers, your step manager, coordinator, or with Canada Export themselves. In general, most of these funding programs are for small to mid-sized companies, and the product of origin is really important. So for all of our U.S. organizations, obviously they're supporting U.S. products. It's not so much whether you are a US business, of course you need to do that too, but all the funding is for products of US origin. The same applies to Canada, just, obviously on the Canadian side. You have to go through a qualification process that is really important, and then register for program inclusion. But, all these details, you best contact your branded program manager about. They know all about it and they can guide you all through it. The way it usually works is you put activity plans together for the different markets, following obviously the guidelines that the SRTGs and your program managers are going to give to you. And then you get pre-approved for those markets. Some programs allow amendments to these, some don't. So like, again, it's best to really always check with your coordinator. And for most programs, companies also have to have a certain amount of revenue, and you have to have your own investment. So you have to spend money in order to get the funding. That is really important. It's a fund match program for all of these programs. It is not something where you just get the funding and can spend the money. You'll have to invest your own money too. Okay, so that's more of the general elements. Maybe the next slide. And I think this is where it gets interesting for most of you. What can you use the funding for? Obviously, for us as trade show organizers, what we usually start out with, and even though in these times nowadays it's really difficult having any trade shows, we go hybrid and all that, but nevertheless, we're pretty sure we'll come back and the industry will be coming back. So you can use those funds to help with exhibiting at trade shows overseas, be it for the booth costs. It can cover shipping, it can cover hotel, sales collateral, translations. This doesn't just apply to trade shows, this also applies to trade missions. That's actually something our friends from the SRTGs are offering. They take companies like you overseas to different markets and set up direct meetings with buyers, market educations, and all these kind of elements. Something that is relatively new, but our experts can later tell you a lot more about them, is that you can use funding for virtual elements, like virtual trade shows, virtual conferences. Eligible expenses can include virtual booth fees, translations for the video, design services, all these kind of things, which I think is really cool, because in this transition period that we all are currently in, a lot of us go to some kind of virtual element. So you don't have to give up meeting buyers overseas, it'll be in a different format. Something that I guess it's not so known is that you can also use funding for developing a bilingual version of your website, and things like this, for advertising, for social media, which is especially important nowadays, billboard, all these kind of things, and label and packaging modification if the country that is your target country is requiring changes to that. And I think that really helps with the costs. So that is just something for you guys to know. And if we go over to the next slide, please. Sharon, can we move over? Okay, so that comes to the, mostly for the US companies, for the most important programs that there really is, which is the Market Access Program, MAP or MAP funds, and the ATP. The Market Access Program is the older program. It is really to help build export markets for US agricultural products. And the element that is important for you, especially when it comes to the funding, is the branded program. As I mentioned before, most of these programs have a size requirement for small to mid-sized companies. This actually applies to MAP funds. It offers you up to 50% reimbursement of a lot of these costs that are pre-approved. So that is something that can really help you stretch your dollars when you go overseas and maybe get a bigger booth, put some advertising, put money on, you know, hanging nice banners, these kind of things. And then obviously it also helps with travel arrangements or costs rather, which is really important. As we all know, it adds up quickly. And the other new program that was actually launched in 2019 was something that was launched when we had all these problems with new trade barriers being imposed against the US. And that is the ATP program. It works a lot like the MAP program. There are some significant differences. Our experts can tell you more about it later. And maybe something that is actually really nice, it actually does allow companies that are larger, 3 times up the size of the Small Business Administration definition, to receive funds like this. So it just broadened really the pool. It looks like this program will potentially end in 2020-23. So, but again, that is something that your SRTGs can help you. Going over to the next slide. So we are, you know, how can you get funds like this? That's really where our friends from the state's regional trade groups come in. Darren, can you switch over the slide, please? Okay, so anyways, that's also why we have our 4, you know, we're so happy that we have 4 guest speakers from the state regional trade group. So they administer like 2 elements of this, this program. One is the important one for you, that is really, you know, about funds that they can provide to you to help with your export activities. And the other element they are working on is activities that they themselves create, like the trade missions I mentioned earlier and other activities that then can also help you give more exposure to the different markets. So you will receive this presentation afterwards. As I mentioned, you'll have a link there. The regional trade groups, they go by states. You know, each SRTG covers a certain number of states. You'll find that list under the member states that is linked on the slides. And I think one of the things that is probably the best, especially if you're new to the whole thing, I've seen early on the list, we have some companies that are coming in from, that have used funds already before, so maybe that's familiar to you already. But if not, if you're relatively new or would like a refresher, each of them put together a guide that tells you exactly what kind of costs are covered, what processes are needed, how to be approved, and then obviously they're going to work with you really closely to make sure that you understand the program and that you submit everything as needed, okay? So, and this is something I included, even though I have to say we're really lucky, or most of the food companies here are really lucky, because the USDA offers an awesome program with both the MEPs and the ATP funding that gives you a lot more money, or that you can do a lot more with. The states, the Small Business Administration has a STEP program funding. Now, I have to say, this can be a valuable additional source. You cannot double it. So just to pass that on up front. And you also really have to touch base with the state, because these programs are run by the different state partners, and they can vary significantly from, you know, what is the requirement for them, what is the maximum reimbursement, do they allow food or not. There are some states that reserve STEP for non-food companies, while others actually, you know, do allow them and maybe have other activities. But in general, I would suggest to always work with the state regional trade groups, because it's a much more extensive program. But I wanted to include it just to give you an overall picture of this. So Darren, can you please move over to the next slide? So this is for Canada. I know it's a little brief. There is one main funding access point that you have, which is offered by the Canadian Trade Commissioner Service. As you can see, it's also for smaller and mid-sized companies. This covers all the industry, including food industries. Agriculture, Agri-Food Canada is no longer really doing, you know, funding programs. This is really handled by Can Export. Now, there are some trade associations like the Canadian Exporter Association, there are like the Organic Trade Association that use funds like this, similar for associations also. And sometimes if you participate in one of their programs, you can get funding from them for that. But the primary source is really the Can Export program. Everything is pretty much run online, so you want to go check it. Go through the applicant's guide to answer a lot of the questions that you may have, and it's a good starting point for you. And maybe just to point out, the only difference, or rather one of the main differences, is they have two ways to give you funding. One is one where they match the contributions, and you have to submit receipts, which, by the way, you have to do for all the MAP and ATP funds. And the other program is really where they allot you the money as a grant and give it to you all up front. But that depends on their evaluation of your company. So that's pretty much it for Canada. You probably recognize this slide. I'm sorry if I was a little fast earlier. I wanted to bring it up because now it's actually time to bring on our experts from whom you really want to hear, and they can give you all the scoop. So we actually prepared a number of different questions to start a conversation. As I mentioned before, feel free to join in. You can do it via the chat window or just with the, unmuting yourself. So Andy, maybe I'll start with you. How knowledgeable do companies have to be about export when they first contact you? And do they need to have experience to actually get the funding from you?
How knowledgeable do they have to be?
Yeah, or do they have to have some experience already, or?
They don't have to. They don't have to be exporting. We have a lot of companies come to us who have never exported, and we will work with them between like WSADA and our state departments of agriculture in educating them on helping them find the information that they need. So we have a variety of companies, expertise that come to us, from seasoned exporters who are just looking to expand their budget, all the way down to brand new companies who have never, their export has been to the neighboring state, but not to any foreign country. So we take all comers.
Well, it actually probably also makes for a very interesting work day sometimes. When you work with really small companies or larger ones, it can make our lives also like interesting or more exciting. And I guess it's also like nice to sometimes help a new company out and help them be established in the market.
Yes.
Go ahead. Okay. So, Danielle, I think some of the questions that sometimes come up, what is really the best tip that you can, or advice that you can give companies when it comes to funding? And can you maybe also explain a little bit more what the differences between the MAP and the ATP funds are?
Sure, and repeat the first question. I didn't miss, or I missed a little bit of it.
Yeah. So what is kind of the best tips, or maybe the advice you can give to companies who are starting the whole funding process?
Yes, so we at SESTA always advise companies to really utilize our staff. We have folks on hand who will who do consultations for when you're creating your application. This is for new companies, obviously, who are new to the program. It's their first time applying for these funds. We're on hand to really walk you through the application process, the expense claim process. So utilize the staff that is there. We also have a very thorough cost share guide that you have linked in the presentation. And of course, so everything is really laid out there, but I think sometimes it's easier to talk to an actual person and go over some specific questions. So, we always recommend that companies call us and do a brief consultation. And then the difference between MAP and ATP. Is that, yes. Yeah. So through ATP, we've been able to work with companies that are a little bit bigger than the Small Business Administration guidelines allow. So under MAP, companies that are applying for our cost share program have to fit within Small Business Administration guidelines. And under ATP, companies can come into that program and get or apply for the 50% reimbursement, and they can be up to 3 times the small business size limit. So it's really allowed us to work with and help out some companies that are in more of that medium-sized business category.
Okay, that's great. So I didn't mention it before, but there is actually a difference when you're a first-time applicant to the program in terms of the funding that you can receive, or whether you have worked with the program a little bit longer. And Molly, can you maybe explain a little bit more why the first-year companies have a much lower maximum amount that they can get?
Absolutely. Thanks, Veronica. Yeah, so when we get a new company that applies to our reimbursement program, we often know that they can struggle a bit to understand exactly what we can offer in terms of reimbursement. And they also can struggle a bit with the paperwork requirements. Our programs are audited and they're federal programs, so they do require a bit of backup documentation. And we know from experience that this can be a steep learning curve for new companies. So with that in mind, we offer limits to first-time participants just so they don't overextend themselves when they first use our programs. If a company is a first-time exporter and a first-time participant in our program, the maximum that we'll reimburse for them is $25,000, or they would need to spend $50,000, and then we'd reimburse 50% of that $25,000. If a company is a more experienced exporter, they've been exporting the last couple of years, they already perhaps have a presence in the market, maybe an importer that is assisting with the marketing efforts. In that situation, we'd allow for reimbursement up to $50,000, or the company would be spending $100,000 and get half of that back. And that's just applicable to the first year. After that, our typical maximums apply.
Okay, that was really helpful. Thank you so much, Molly. I appreciate it. We actually had a question coming in from the audience, and the question was, how does the branded program work for beverage companies? When we talk about food companies, you know, it kind of covers the entire spectrum of different types of food, from the finished product, semi-finished ingredients. But maybe, Andy, there's something that you can talk on a little bit. Is there, you know, are there any products that are not allowed? Is the process all the same?
Well, if it's an agricultural product, fished, farmed, or forested in the U.S., it's eligible for the program. The only caveat that I would throw out would be that some other cooperators besides the SRTGs have branded programs, and if it was a product that was covered by another MAP participant, we may send them to another MAP participant to get their branded funding. But you can always start with us and we can talk through what your product is. But the main criteria was it fished, farmed, or forested in the U.S.? So it has to be at least 50% grown or harvested in the U.S.
Yeah, well, that's helpful. And then, like you mentioned, you'll send them over to a cooperator, should that be the case. But the process and the eligibility and the benefits are technically all the same. It's the same program, correct?
Correct.
Okay, that's cool. So, and how do you work with, you know, I think all of our SRTGs have State Department of Agriculture's liaisons. How do you work with that? How does the client work on this end?
Well, yes, we work very closely with our state departments of agriculture. If a company comes to WSATA seeking funding and assistance in marketing, we would always loop in that State Department of Agriculture from whatever state they come from, because the state departments of agriculture have some different services maybe that would augment what the state regionals provide. So we work in close collaboration with the state departments of agriculture, and in many cases the State Department of Agriculture may be the first contact that a company has, and then they provide whatever services they can, but they then send the companies on to the state regional for the services and the funding that we provide. So it's we are our state departments of agriculture, they are us, you know, so it's a very close relationship.
Yeah. That's actually a good occasion to bring Kim in. Kim is actually, as Mette mentioned earlier, works for the Department of Agriculture for Illinois. And she actually is also one of those state liaisons that we just mentioned. So Kim, what is your process? How do you usually work with it? And maybe, I think you had an interesting story to share about how company size might matter or not matter to actually have success overseas.
Well, in terms of, how we work with our regional, as Andy mentioned, we consider them a partner. So we try to recruit for and promote the SRTG activities. In this case, it's Food Export Midwest. I'm one of their member states, so when we try not to duplicate what they're doing, and so it's more of value added. But when we're working with companies and whatnot, there's usually a state assigned liaison at the SRTG. We refer them to that person so that they can help them with their questions more in depth. In some cases, I cross-sell a lot of things that we're doing. For example, the Anuga show that you guys put on that we participate in. What we'll do is, we'll offer cost assistance to our Illinois-based businesses or eligible businesses, but then we'll cross-sell other programs that are happening in conjunction with the show, whether it's a buyer's mission or Food Show Plus services, or like what we're talking about today, the branded program. So we try to cross-promote all of those things to companies that are already participating in existing activities. And then I didn't quite understand the second part of your question. Veronica, can you repeat?
When we talked previously, that you had mentioned you had something that stood out for you was a company who was really successful, even though they weren't really that big.
The success stories?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So there's a lot of, that's what we obviously work toward, is success stories on every activity that either we as a state work on, or any of the activities that our state regional trade group is doing. That is our goal, is for success stories to happen from those events. And so we try to be, even after the event's over, we try to help them through the leads and any assistance that they need afterwards. So there is a success story. But the one that stands out to me that I always like to tell the story about, just because, a lot of the companies we work with on both the state regional trade group level or the state level, they're small companies. And so I always tell companies, you don't have to be a large exporter to export a product, and you don't have to be a manufacturer. A lot of our companies, their products are co-packed. So one of my biggest success stories is I work with a small company. He's actually a one-man show, and his product is not manufactured, it's co-packed. And they actually just do 1 or 2 international events a year. And because of those 2 events, they have been able, through not only our cost assistance, but all of the various programs and services that our state regional trade group offers, they export to over 11 countries currently. And so I always tell that story because I think that kind of speaks volumes about all the opportunities that are out there.
Yeah, that's true. And then maybe, since you mentioned earlier Anuga and our show, where you actually also exhibited with us in the USA Pavilion at Anuga, along with both SASTA and WISADA, and also the Food Export Associations. But you, as Illinois, you actually have a subgroup, right? So can a company that comes in through you still get all these MAP funds?
Yes, they can. And so how we work that so that companies are not, double dipping, is that we offer our cost assistance. So I basically give, after the company pays us, the eligible company pays us, I give them a paid receipt showing what they paid us. They turn that into the state regional trade group and are able to get 50% back on what we are charging. And so that way the state,
for those
that way the state regional trade group kind of knows what,
and for
what they
those
paid.
that are lucky enough that are in Illinois and should participate through you, they end up paying a lot less, right? Because you can subsidize the booth already for them before you even sell it, right? I mean, or sell it.
Correct.
Which is actually
Yes, that is
really great. That's another way to stretch the dollars, right?
correct. Yes.
Okay. Actually, the person who had a question earlier, and please feel free to keep sending in some of the questions. That was about the beverage, specifically actually asking about kombucha. And I think here we may have something about the ingredients. So I don't know, does Molly or Dan, you want to take this on? Is kombucha something that can qualify?
Yes. Who did you ask that to, Veronica? Did you ask Molly?
You can answer too, Andy. Either one of you, Andy, Danielle.
Okay, yes,
Molly.
kombucha is a qualified product. We have several kombucha companies that are currently participating in the program.
Okay, so sometimes when I work with companies to be at our trade shows, you know, I have companies that have tea and things like that, tea or coffee. Is that something that is allowed under the MAP?
Well, there are only two areas in the U.S. where coffee would qualify: Puerto Rico and Hawaii, because they would be that. Otherwise, if it's not, again, the rule of thumb is was it grown in the U.S.?
Okay.
So if there are very few teas that qualify, as far as I'm aware, and coffee only Hawaii and Puerto Rico grow coffee that's eligible for the program. But if you have the rule, like I say, the rule of thumb to remember is that 50% of your product has to be either fished, farmed, or forested in the U.S.
Yeah, that is really helpful. And that is also something, of course, you know, when you work with SITGs, they're on top of this, they can give you all this advice and you know, guide you through different programs. So maybe another question that I have, Molly, I don't know if you can hear me, but what are the costs that SRTGs or MAP rather can cover that most surprises companies? They never counted on that. That's something they could get reimbursed for.
Hey, Veronica, thanks. I would say it really varies by company. A common pitfall that companies fall into is they, you know, come to our branded program and get reimbursed for the same expense year after year. And we obviously want them to grow and take advantage of new ways to use the program. We often encourage companies to check out things like freight for sample shipments. That's an easy way to expose your program to buyers. And a new way. A new way to use the program is related to virtual events. We're really seeing this pick up this year, and we're trying to spread the word about how companies, if you're going to a virtual trade show or taking advantage of perhaps an online catalog or resource, that we'd love to work with you on getting your brand out there in the international marketplace in new ways.
Okay, that's great.
Can I add something to that?
Sure, Danielle, go ahead.
Just since, you know, everybody is now home and in front of screens, and the that uptick of people just sitting in front of their computer more, we have seen more folks coming in for social media expenses, and so we've been talking about it more with all of our companies, and some of our companies are really surprised that that is something that our cost share program can help with. So you know, I mean, if you're on Facebook or Instagram, you're always seeing ads popping up. Those are things that our companies can be doing, targeting a foreign market and get the 50% reimbursement of. So that's, you know, when you think about building your brand domestically and all of those kinds of things that you do, that kind of brand, building that brand in that way, you could be doing in the international marketplace as well.
What are there any special regulations that have to be included in those social media advertisements or something? I'm asking because, you know, when we have companies exhibiting with us in the USA Pavilion or that exhibit with Visata or SUSTA, they usually have to at least show produced in or made in the USA or things like that.
Yep, those same regulations apply. The eligible origin statement has to be there. They have to be promoting, you know, their brand. but there are ways to get creative and be in the year 2020 and use these programs. Yeah, like Molly said, we have a lot of companies who've been using them in the same way over and over, and now that they're not traveling to trade shows, they're looking for new ways to promote their brands, especially in those markets where they already have distribution.
Okay.
The handy thing too to remember, and I think Molly may have been the one that brought this up earlier, all of the SRTGs are more than willing to take on a question if you're being creative and you have an idea of how to market your product and you're unsure of whether or not it qualifies. Call up your local SRTG. The staff would be happy to talk to you, be happy to work with you and walk through what types of requirements you need, what pitfalls to look out for. So, we really encourage companies to call and ask questions when they're getting innovative and creative on what they're doing.
Yep, like influencers, that was one that came up, and I think that bubbled up in with several different companies in all of our regions. And yes, we can help with things like influencers as well, as long as it's targeting a foreign market and that market is in your branded or cost share fund match application.
There's actually a question for another audience member, and it goes back to the eligibility of products. As Andy had mentioned, it's really about, the 50% has to be US grown fish farm or produced. But what if a product is 100% US made? The person didn't specify, but I don't know, they may not have all just US ingredients. It's just made in the US. I'm not quite sure, but maybe you can talk to this. One of you?
Sure. Yes, it has to be like Andy said. Even if it's made here, if you're importing 100% of the ingredients, then it would not be eligible. Yeah, it's by the product's weight, and you take out any water weight or packaging weight, and you look at the the core ingredients or what the product is actually made from. And at least 50% of the weight has to be farmed, fished, forested here in the US.
Actually, maybe a question that sometimes also comes up, some of our companies don't go direct to a trade show, or, especially now, maybe they have a distributor working a trade show, depending on where it is. Can MAP funds be used for participation overseas by a distributor? Molly, maybe you can say something about this? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. So if a company works with their distributor and is exhibiting at an international trade show, we're happy to work with you. There is one caveat, which is there are some trade shows that have USA pavilions. Anuga would be a good example. There's a very large USA pavilion presence at that show. And as we are a USDA program and the USA pavilion is a USDA program, we try to combine efforts, and at those shows, we are required to have you exhibit in the USA Pavilion. If you're choosing to exhibit with your distributor outside of the pavilion, we ask that you just contact us and give us the heads up you're going to do so. We have to approve that request ahead of time in order to still reimburse you. However, we recognize that working with your distributor at an international show can often be a really beneficial way to continue your presence in the market and to grow it. So please do take advantage of that if it's applicable to you.
Yeah, I think that's actually really helpful. So one of the things that I wanted to bring up too, we talk a lot about funding for, what kind of funding is available for companies to be helped with expenses. But one of the things that I'm always very impressed with is with all the activities that you guys are offering companies to realize from the trade missions and now virtually then. So I thought I'll just give you the floor and you can talk a little bit more about those programs and how they can enhance export exposure even more. So maybe Andy, you want to start?
Sure. The SRTGs offer two main programs for companies to participate in. We have our generic program where we do things like trade shows, outbound missions where we take companies to foreign countries or bring foreign buyers back to the US. And so if they take advantage of those turnkey operations that that the SRTGs provide. That's in addition to their 50% reimbursement. So there are a lot of opportunities. And as Kim mentioned, many states do activities, and we work closely with our states to make sure that the things that they're doing qualify also for under the MAP regs for what the state regionals are doing. So there are a lot of opportunities. Again, if you have a question, just ask. We'd be more than happy to share.
Danielle, I think SUSTA has been doing a lot more on virtual programming. Do you want to talk a little bit about it?
Yep, we sure have. When COVID hit, we tried to pivot fairly quickly so that our generic program, our global events, could still be utilized to help connect our companies with foreign buyers. So we have done several, or it's ongoing, different virtual options. One really exciting one is a virtual trade mission. So it's, it would be on Zoom like we are today, and a company would meet one-on-one with several different buyers in a foreign country. And I think what makes these trade missions actually, really valuable, it's two things. Before you would meet with the foreign buyers through Zoom, our foreign consultants in that country do a full market assessment. So a really thorough assessment of, your product category in their country. And in addition to that, we cover up to a certain amount of shipping your product to the foreign country, and then our in-country consultants make sure that the buyers you're meeting with have your product. I mean, as we're all dealing with food and beverage, it's really hard to get in front of a foreign buyer without them actually having your product in hand. So, I think we really went that extra step to make sure that they would have those products and be able to taste and, and have it, see it. So that has been really exciting. Those are selling out extremely quickly. We're also doing virtual consultations with our foreign consultants, and we've launched a couple virtual trade shows. So again, the U.S. company would pay a fee, and included in that fee would be shipment of product to the trade show in the foreign country. And then our consultants would be at the show. So, the products and the marketing materials would be on display, but the U.S. company doesn't have to travel. Our consultants are there, kind of, speaking on behalf of the company, and actually even setting up Zoom meetings if, if there's interest there on the spot at the trade show. So, this new world that we have been presented with, we're really just trying to use the available technology to keep things moving.
Yeah, especially, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, we are excited. We are anxious to get going with our trade shows. So we actually have our TIFAX here at the end of September in Bangkok, which will be on site. But, obviously a lot of trade shows, also of ours and others internationally, had to be canceled. So maybe going back a little bit to the MAPs for those of our guests who are already, receiving MAP funding. What happened what happens now that events are moved from 2020 to 2021? Is MAP funding rolled over? Do they get reimbursements for costs that they cannot get refunded? How does that work? Molly, maybe you?
Yeah, I can tackle this one. So this has become a regular topic on my calls with our participants this year. So we've had a ton of companies impacted by canceled or postponed events. And we have a number of different ways of working with them. So if a company was planning to exhibit at a show that was canceled this year, if any of their expenses were not refunded, for example, maybe they created a booth that they had to pay for but won't be using this year, or maybe they had to ship samples to be at the show, but that samples were never needed. We'd still cover those expenses like we would as if the show was happening. Now, if a company is exhibiting at a show and it was moved from this year to next year to 2021, the company will need to reapply to our branded program for next year. The way our program works is on a calendar year, so every year we ask companies to reapply, and so they'll need to do that for next year. Some of them will therefore have some extra funds available for 2020. And again, we're trying to get creative on ways to use that funding. We've seen a lot of companies. Go ahead, Veronica.
Yeah, so for example, since you actually exhibit with us and a group at our Alimentec show in Bogota, which was moved from this year June to next year March, so those companies within your group or the ones that are also just in the USA Pavilion, they will just have to reapply then for all the funding, correct?
Right, so they would apply again in 2021 and be reimbursed for Alimentec. If they already paid for anything that they won't be able to use for 2021, we'll help reimburse those costs since they're non-refundable. But we're hoping they could reuse those funds for other things like working with their online advertising or their websites or social media. So we're having a lot of conversations around this very topic.
Takes a lot of flexibility nowadays for us all, huh?
Yes, definitely. I think we can all say that.
Yeah, so if there may be any other questions or whether, you know, maybe Andy or Danielle or Molly or Kim want to say something else, maybe another, I don't know, story or something, a success story, go ahead.
Well, I would just say, you know, we have one success story that we're just talking about in the office here recently, that we discovered this company at a farmer's market, and they're now exporting to 6 different countries, and they've gone from producing their product in a rented kitchen to having their own facility, and gone from a husband and wife team to now have 6 employees and are exporting to 6 different countries. So there can be success. You know, again, I would just reiterate, we're always there. The state regional staffs are always there. If you have a question, you have a concern, you're unsure about whether or not what you want to do qualifies, give us a call. We would love to hear from you. We can, as both Danielle and Molly have said several times, we're happy to discuss what you're doing, discuss opportunities, help you brainstorm on how to market your product or things that you can do to utilize these reimbursement dollars. So just give us a call.
Yeah. So maybe for all of you who are still here, the ones you're going to share the slides afterwards, as I mentioned, you will have emails from all of our panelists on there, so you can contact them directly. You also have the website link. So you can go to the website and to, you know, also go directly, we link directly the fund match program or the cost reimbursement programs. They are sometimes called different ways, but they operate kind of the same. So you can download those and then go through them and then reach out to the SRTGs. I think you'll find them very valuable. And it's for all kinds of different markets, for all kinds of activities, trade missions, and of course for trade shows like ours, which we are hoping that you'll be joining us at one of ours. Like in next year, like I mentioned, we have the Alimentec in Bogota in March. We have another TIFEX end of May. We have Anuga, which most of you know, in October next year. We have an India show. So be in different markets, and we can also, you know, provide you a platform to contact companies directly in the market. Nowadays, often through your distributor that you may have or local staff. Hopefully next year, all of us going to be on site again in those venues. And yeah, so I thank you, and maybe hand back the mic to Mette.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. That was really interesting. I must say, I learned a lot myself, and I find it's incredibly cool that it's possible to use the funding also towards social media and virtual trade shows and virtual trade missions. That's really neat. And just to supplement what Veronica was saying, several of our trade shows are still on schedule. Certainly TIFEX in Bangkok this fall. Also our Sweet and Snack show Yamex in Dubai in November is on schedule. And our Sweet and Snack show in Cologne in January, ISM, is currently still on schedule. And we certainly hope that will be the case. We are, of course, working on the operational logistical issues around organizing events that follow all the proper guidelines. but I don't want to get into details for now. Wanted to thank all of our panelists for participating. It was really interesting, and thank you so much to our attendees for taking time to join us. And as Veronica said, we'll make this available next week, and just contact us with any questions you may have. So with that, thank you so much, everybody. Stay safe and healthy, and enjoy the rest of the summer.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks to our speakers, and you all, have a great time, and hopefully we'll see each other in person at least next year. Okay, bye-bye.